My name is Fiona Curtis. I work at the University of Leicester as part of the primary PGCE team. We train teachers, that's what we do in this particular role. So I'm here today talking to Nargis about how we can support you as teachers in helping the ladies on your programme to learn how to read.
Thank you. I have some questions. Like, can you tell me a little bit about how people learn to read?
Yeah, of course. So I think the important thing to remember in your role as trainers is that learning to read is a really difficult and complex process, and it takes time to learn, especially if you're learning to read for the first time in a language which isn't your own language, not your first language. So I think a really important sort of first message to get across is that patience and praise and encouragement are really important parts of the work that you're going to do. I think just expect there to be sort of very small steps in the learning, and make sure that you're really looking after the well-being and the morale of the women that you're working with. So learning to read is really about sort of developing two different strands of knowledge and understanding. So there's a well-known model that we talk about when we think about what we actually need to understand when we're learning to read. It's called the simple view of reading. And what that does is it lays out the fact that to become a reader, you need to develop your language comprehension skills, but you also need to develop your word recognition skills. Now, on this programme, the way that you're going to be thinking about developing language and understanding language is through, isn't it, those little mini dialogues that you've got planned that are in the workbook. And I think what's going to be key in terms of those is that you as teachers work really hard on thinking about, how you are going to model that dialogue really clearly for the women that you're working with. So lots of repetition will be required, lots of really clear pronunciation, because I know that's kind of a key part of your programme, isn't it? You really want your learners to be able to hear how real English sounds and be able to replicate that. So one of the sort of key teaching strategies that I think I would try to keep in mind is this idea of modelling through a sort of a process of I do it as the teacher, we do it together, so we're scaffolding you as the learner, and then you have a go at doing it sort of by yourself independently. So we're kind of gradually just sort of passing that responsibility over from the teacher to the learner about how we're going to develop that and build confidence. So you're going to be teaching word recognition through a phonetic approach, and that's actually, I think, going to be really useful to all of the women on your programme, because if they have children here in English schools, that is exactly the way that their children are being taught to read. So it could be a useful thing for them to become familiar with. They'll be able to understand how their children are learning too.
Thank you. And also, can you please explain the phonetics approach? How does this help the learners to read?
Okay, so a phoneme is the smallest unit of sound in a word. So if, for example, we had the word mat, the word mat has 3 phonemes. So the phonemes are at. Okay. Phonemes mustn't be confused with letters. Okay, they're slightly different. So if we had the word chip, for example, the word chip has 4 letters, doesn't it? C-H-I-P, 4 letters, but it only has 3 phonemes. Ch, I, chip. Okay. So the phonemes are the pure sounds that make up the word, and if we learn them, then we can learn how to blend them together in order to make words. Okay. So that's kind of the approach. It's being able to look at the letters on the page, which we call graphemes, that's the kind of the proper term for them. We look at the letters or the graphemes on the page and we know the sound that they tell us to make. We can blend those sounds together and then we're starting to read the words from the page. So by linking the sounds to the letters or the phonemes to the graphemes, then we're starting to be able to be readers. So, as I said, if I know then if I blend those sounds together, I can read the word mat. Okay, that's basically the approach. So what is really important about phonetics is that what we learn to say are actually the pure sounds. So as teachers, the key thing is that we're learning to use those pure sounds rather than sounds of what we call a schwa. So, for example, you heard me there that I said I didn't say m. Okay, I said t, not m, t. Because actually, if I try to blend m, t together, what you get is matter. You don't get mat. So learning pure sounds is key. And there are lots of ways that you can do that. There are lots and lots of resources online, lots of videos on YouTube. If you just search for pure sounds or phonics or articulating sounds, there's lots of resources there that will show you how to do that for you. So the key thing is we need to reduce that schwa. It's a really funny word. It's basically a word for an unstressed vowel sound. And it's the most common sound in the whole of the English language. We use it all the time. But most of the time we don't realise we're doing it. It's just kind of part of what we do. We add it into our speech all the time. But if we can reduce that schwa, that actually makes that process of reading those sounds and blending those sounds together effectively so much easier. So if I show you with another example, if we had those three sounds, if I said t, op, top, easy to blend together. If I said t, op, I've got topper. Okay. So it's a really key part of that process of learning to read. So important that you teach your learners the pure sounds and that you link them to the graphemes early on as well. So they're starting to recognise whenever they see this letter shape, the sound is t. Okay, nice and short, nice and clear. Okay, so when you're starting to work with your learners on this process, it's really important as well that you're listening really carefully to them. You're listening to the sounds that they're making, and that you're making sure you're modelling back that really pure, crisp, short sound as best you can. Okay, that's really going to help their overall pronunciation, because we know pronunciation is one of the really tricky things, isn't it? Exactly. If you're learning, a different language.
The workbook, why there are some letters included where there is a dialogue, like to practice them.
Okay.
What's the importance of that?
So on the pages where you've got little mini conversations that you're going to model and practice with your learners, you've got some letters that are highlighted in red and some words that are highlighted in green. Okay, so the letters that are there in red are there, aren't they, to allow your learners to begin to listen out for these sounds that they're learning. So they're learning these in isolation, but we want them to start to be able to listen out and hear them in the words. So they're actually starting to apply this knowledge of phonetics to what they're hearing and what they're saying themselves. So the letters that are there in red, we've got the kind of the little images and the letters running alongside to remind them, what is that sound that I'm looking out for? So if I think, for example, one of your phrases is, how are you? And we've got H, the letter H highlighted in red. So what we want to do is remind your learners that that sound is and when they're hearing the word how, what they're actually hearing is ow. So they can start to sort of really hear those sounds in the context of those little phrases and sentences that you're modelling and you're teaching them how to say. Okay. So the green words are there, aren't they? Because they're what we might refer to as tricky words. Okay, they're high frequency words. They're ones that we use an awful lot in English. But actually, we can't sound them out in this way. They don't work in the same way. So I know one of the words that you have written in green is R. Okay. So the word R, if I tried to sound it out, I'd have which is not that word at all. So we recognise that the problem with the English language is that it's not purely phonetic. Some of the words we have to learn by sight. We have to look at the whole word and recognise what the word says, and then start to understand what the word means. So that's the kind of the difference between those red letters and those green words. And it's about starting, isn't it, to introduce your learners to that idea that actually English is a really complex language because we don't have a simple alphabetic code. It's not one letter equals one sound.
Yes.
It's much more complex than that. So it's just kind of starting to kind of gradually.
One letter can have many sounds.
That's it. It's starting to introduce them to that idea, isn't it, in a nice kind of simple way.
And also about learning to write, like, and practice. How can I like help them with that?
Right. Okay. So obviously, starting to link letters and sounds together is really important. So if you've got your learners started to hear and to say the sounds, we want them to also start recognising the letters that represent them. So what we need to do is also just to kind of maintain an awareness that some of your learners, for example, might never have used a pen.
Yeah.
It might be something completely new to them. So first stages always, I think, for your learners is to make sure that they are just really comfortable using a pen, holding a pen. And initially that might just mean mark making, doing patterns, drawing shapes, doing little pictures, whatever it might be, and just till they're really confident and feeling control of their pen. Because obviously letter formation is all about good control, good pen control. So we want them to feel comfortable first before we start to do that. When you feel that your learners are ready to begin writing letters, it can also be really kind of useful to let them start big on a whiteboard like this, or you have the whiteboards that you can write on and rub off as well. So often big is easier, and then you can gradually, as you get more control, you can go down to sort of writing much sort of smaller, neater letters, can't you? Now the style of the lettering that we've chosen and that you've put into the workbook is known as cursive lettering. And I think when you first look at the sort of shape and form of those letters, you might think, oh, they're quite curly and they're quite complicated. You know, why have you chosen that particular approach? Well, there is a logic behind it. It's got one big advantage, and the advantage is that when you write cursively, every letter starts in exactly the same place. So if we're always writing on a line, with cursive lettering, everything we do starts from the line. So it doesn't matter what the letter might be, A, B, etc. We're always starting in exactly the same place. And actually that's really important for reducing cognitive load, because writing requires so many kind of different parts of your brain to activate, that if we can kind of just take one of those things away, which is thinking, where do I put my pen to start, actually we're going to hopefully help people to be more successful with their writing. So that's kind of the rationale, if you like, behind that particular approach. And I think another thing to remember as well, when you've got your learners started writing, try and really encourage them as well to say the sounds of the letters as they write them. You know, so if they're writing here, it's ah. So they're absolutely linking, their brains are linking together, you know, what they're hearing, what they're saying, what their hands are doing at the same time as well. That's a really important part of learning that process too.
Thank you so much.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.